I broke the stick trying to get out, but I couldn't, and it made a hole through my jeans.
You'll be in here for a while longer, won't you?
Yeah, about a week.
Do you think you'll be playing with firecrackers anymore?
Yes.
Don't you think you've learned a lesson from this?
Yes, but I'm still playing with.
This event took place in Tasmania, Australia on April 28, 1996. Martin Bryant, a 28-year-old man born in Hobart on May 7, 1967, showed some differences from a young age. Despite growing up in a loving home, he didn't seem to like physical affection from his parents and didn't show much interest in bonding with them. Martin Bryant, when he started school, had a habit of being alone, which became more noticeable. He had trouble speaking and making friends, and he would often act aggressively. In August 1977, he got suspended from Newtown Primary School. Afterward, he went through an evaluation at the Hobart Diagnostic Center. During this assessment, Martin mentioned his interest in hurting animals and how he liked to bother his sister. There are records mentioning incidents of stealing, violent outbursts, and targeting vulnerable children. It's also mentioned that he found pleasure in teasing and causing distress to these children. He was also believed to be hyperactive and was prescribed medication. However, Martin later recalled feeling alone, ignored by other children, being subjected to severe bullying, and feeling scared to attend school. These memories would dominate his school experience, and Martin posed additional difficulties. His father made various attempts to help him fit in. Around the age of 14, Martin received an air rifle from his father. With this new weapon, he started hiding in a creek bed near their house and aimed at passing vehicles. He also dedicated a significant amount of time to shooting at birds. Whenever Martin managed to hit a bird, he would approach the lifeless body and continue firing multiple shots at close range. Occasionally, Martin would shoot his rifle at tourists who were unaware as they passed near the market stalls along the highway. There are also reports stating that on October 20th, 1992, he even targeted a neighbor's dog with his gunfire. It happened when Martin and Helen were on a grocery shopping trip in their car. While performing odd jobs like gardening and cleaning, Martin encountered a woman named Helen Harvey in 1987. Helen, who was in her 50s, happened to be the heiress to the Tattersall lottery fortune and owned several properties. She was known for being quite wealthy, but also eccentric and secluded in her lifestyle. In July 1990, Helen's mother passed away, and Martin decided to move into her mansion. The mansion was home to more than 40 cars and around a dozen dogs. Martin and Helen began going on lavish shopping trips and spending large amounts of money. Martin no longer had any financial worries. Surprisingly, he continued to collect his disability allowance, even though he now had access to plenty of funds. On October 20th, 1992, Martin and Helen went on a drive to buy groceries. Unfortunately, while they were returning, their car swerved onto the wrong side of the road and crashed into another vehicle. Tragically, Alan, the driver of the oncoming vehicle, lost his life instantly. Martin sustained severe injuries in the accident, and he was taken to the hospital where he was diagnosed with vertebral and rib fractures as well as a head injury. The head injury caused him to be unconscious for more than an hour, and he experienced persistent headaches for 4 weeks following the incident. Following Helen's passing, Martin became the sole inheritor of her estate. He now received her trust fund payments and gained ownership of her properties. Helen had specifically included Martin in her will, leaving him with everything she had. Martin, despite not having worked for any of the money, was now extremely rich, just out of sheer luck. In his quest to make new friends, Martin would wear peculiar and unusual outfits. For instance, he would don a vibrant blue suit, carry a briefcase, and claim to be a wealthy businessman while visiting a restaurant. The restaurant owner later recalled that it was embarrassing for him and everyone else. Everyone, including the customers, laughed at him. I couldn't help but feel sorry for him. It became clear that this man didn't have many friends in his life. After selling his farm, Martin started traveling the world, and his favorite part was the flights because he could talk to the fellow passengers who had nowhere else to go. He visited cities like Sydney, Melbourne, Miami, London, Bangkok, Tokyo, and many more. In late 1995, when he returned to Australia, Martin lost his luggage, and when it was found, customers discovered 4 illegal X-rated videos. These videos showed adults involved with animals, and Martin later admitted that in 1995, he had reached a point where he had enough and sometimes thought about ending his own life. In early 1996, Martin started acquiring several weapons. During that time, he also allegedly made a statement to one of his neighbors saying, "I will do something that will make everyone remember me." Additionally, Martin placed an advertisement in a newspaper seeking a gardener for his new mansion. A woman named Petra Wilmot responded to the ad and was hired to work at the mansion. After working together for a brief period, Martin and Petra entered into a romantic relationship. While Martin had previously dated a few other girls, those relationships didn't last very long. However, Petra was Martin's first serious girlfriend, and on April 15th, 1996, Martin and Petra went shopping in Hobart. Martin informed Petra that he needed to buy a bag for his Tai Chi classes, and had even brought a tape measure to ensure it was the right size. On the 28th of April 1996, Martin set his alarm for 6 a.m. and began his day. He had breakfast with Petra and they both took a shower. Martin then proceeded to load his yellow Volvo with the bag that he purchased earlier that month. Although he wanted to mention to the shop assistant that he needed strong handles for the bag to carry lots of ammunition. Inside the bag, Martin had items like handcuffs, ropes, a hunting knife, and 3 semi-automatic weapons. Along the way, he made a coffee stop and casually mentioned to some people he met that he was heading to Roaring Beach for a surfing session. Martin even had his surfboard on the roof of his car. However, it turned out he couldn't actually surf. As he made his way to Port Arthur, he first stopped at a guest house named Seascape Cottage, which belonged to David and Sally Martin. This guest house held a certain significance for Martin, as his father attempted to buy it but was outdone by David and Sally. Martin held the belief that Sally purposely purchased the property to cause harm to his family and held him responsible for his father's passing. He drove to the guest house and tragically shot and killed David and Sally Martin. At the time of the incident, there were no guests present. However, shortly after Martin committed the act, 2 tourists happened to come across the guest house and stopped by around 12:30 p.m. The tourists, a married couple, simply wanted to explore the area. They parked their car and started walking around the seascape cottages when suddenly Martin appeared. According to the couple, he seemed agitated, making jerky hand movements and behaving nervously. The husband asked if they could have a look inside one of the apartments. Martin responded in a strange and rude manner, saying his parents were away for a few minutes and that he couldn't show them around because his girlfriend was inside. Feeling uneasy, the wife suggested that they leave, and they walked back into their car and started driving away. As they glanced back, they saw Martin standing in the front of the house, looking in their direction. Shortly after, Martin left and continued his journey towards Port Arthur in his Volvo. Along the way, he encountered two people who had broken down, and he briefly chatted with them. They noticed the surfboard on his car's roof rack and asked if he was going surfing. Martin replied that he was actually heading to the Isle of the Dead to deal with some wasps. He suggested meeting later at the cafe in Port Arthur and then resumed driving around 1:30 p.m. When Martin arrived at the Broad Arrow Cafe, there were about 60 people inside. He purchased some food and drinks and sat outside. Then Martin walked back into the cafe and found an unoccupied table. He put his bag on the table and took out a rifle. Martin started shooting at the unsuspecting people in the cafe. A survivor later spoke to the police and described how Martin didn't say anything, but seemed to be laughing aggressively instead of in a funny way. He walked from table to table, shooting people in the head. The attack happened so quickly that some victims still had utensils in their hands. One man who was shot in the neck but survived heard Martin say, "No one gets away from me," as he fired a gun. During the shooting, the two police officers on duty were more than 40 minutes away at Saltwater River. The sound of the gunshots made it hard to tell where they were coming from. People started running for their lives, but they didn't know where to go or where was safe. Martin left the building and shot and killed more people in the parking lot. Then he got back into his Volvo and continued driving, shooting from his window as he went. A woman named Nanette Mikach and her two daughters, 6-year-old Alana and 3-year-old Madeline, were running away from the scene. Nanette thought they had reached a safe distance and told her daughters they were safe now. But then a yellow Volvo approached them, and Nanette must have thought it could help them escape. However, Martin got out of the car and put his hand on her shoulder. Others who were trying to escape were close enough to hear him telling Nanette to kneel down. She begged him not to hurt her children, but then Martin shot her in the head. He then turned and shot Madeline twice, killing her. Alana, the older sister, ran behind a tree by the roadside. Martin aimed and fired as she ran behind the tree. Then he approached her, pressed the gun against her neck, and fired. Martin got back into his car and drove towards the toll booth. A BMW had just entered through the toll booth when the shooting started. An elderly man warned the people in the car about the shooting and advised them not to go any further. Inside the BMW sat Maury Nixon, Russell Pollard, and passengers Helen and Robert Saltzman. As Martin approached, he got into an argument with Robert and ended up shooting him in the chest. Russell, upon witnessing his friend being shot, jumped out of the car and was also shot in the chest by Martin. Martin then approached the BMW, shot both Mary and Helen, and dragged them out of the car. He transferred ammunition, handcuffs, an air rifle, 15 rounds of ammunition, and a fuel container to the BMW. Leaving his Volvo behind, Martin drove away in the BMW. Martin, now in the BMW, headed to a petrol station. He blocked a couple in a Toyota who were trying to access the highway. Glenn Pierce was driving the car with his girlfriend Zoe Hall as the passenger. Martin, armed with a rifle, approached the car and attempted to pull Zoe out. Glenn intervened, but Martin pointed the gun at him and forced him into the BMW's trunk, locking him inside. Zoe attempted to escape, but was shot in the neck by Martin, resulting in her death. Martin drove the BMW at high speed along the highway and eventually returned to the Seascape guest house. As Martin arrived, he shot at passing cars, and one of the vehicles contained a young woman and her boyfriend. The woman noticed Martin, a blonde-haired man, standing near the BMW with a gun by his side. She thought he might be waiting to shoot rabbits or some other animal, so she slowed down. However, she saw Martin aim the weapon and fire multiple shots. One of the bullets hit her right forearm, causing severe damage. Despite her injuries, the couple managed to escape, but Martin continued shooting at passing cars. The police had already been alerted about the Port Arthur shooting, and Martin's actions of shooting at cars provided them with his location. They made their way to the Seascape cottages, and after shooting at numerous cars, Martin removed Glenn from the trunk, set the BMW on fire, and brought Glenn inside the guest home, where he handcuffed him to the stairwell. The police surrounded the area, leading to a standoff. A horrifying incident took place in Port Arthur, Tasmania, where Australia's worst massacre occurred. Approximately 25 people were shot dead, and at least 15 others were wounded. The gunman who held the police at bay was believed to have taken at least one person hostage. The police attempted to negotiate with Martin for several hours. He falsely claimed to have 3 hostages while he actually had 1. The police believed that David and Sally were still alive based on Martin's statements during negotiations. Martin consistently demanded a helicopter to take him to Hobart Airport with the intention of flying to Adelaide. He threatened to harm his hostages if his demands were not met. He specifically mentioned taking Sally as a hostage. The standoff lasted throughout the night, with Martin continuing to shoot at the police from the building. He fired approximately 150 shots. Smoke was observed coming from the building around 7:45 a.m. on April 29th. The building soon became engulfed in flames. At 8:25 a.m., Martin was seen running from the building, removing his burning clothes until he was completely naked. He fell to his knees, and the police swiftly moved in to arrest him. Martin suffered severe burns and was rushed to the hospital. When the Port Arthur massacre ended, 35 people had lost their lives, and 23 others were injured. The guest house was searched after the flames were extinguished. Inside the ruins, the bodies of David and Sally Martin and Glenn were found. Dental records were used to identify the bodies due to the fire's impact. It was discovered that Glenn had been killed prior to the fire and had sustained gunshot wounds to the neck and stomach. After receiving medical treatment for his injuries, Martin was questioned by the police. He denied any knowledge of the shooting in Port Arthur and claimed to have been surfing during that time. Martin insisted on his innocence and refused to participate in a video-recorded interview for some time. However, Martin's lawyer would eventually convince him to speak. But on Martin's end, this was a mistake. He incriminated himself during the interview, admitting that he was responsible for the shooting while the cameras were still recording.
Shooting upon the person in old schools.
I don't find it very funny statement at all, mate, to be quite honest.
Should have put that on recording.
I'm still recording at this present stage, so that is on recording.
Martin is now serving life in prison without the possibility of parole. He's in his 50s now and is said to live a pathetic life behind bars. His new appearance doesn't at all resemble his old look. He's extremely obese and apparently dim, angry and pathetic. A former prison staffer told the news. Bryant spent most of his time these days alone, eating 2-minute noodles and chocolate, which he sometimes exchanged for sexual favors. He had become grossly fat and declined to take part in exercising in the prison yard. He's got one of those stomachs that kinda hangs down between his legs, the former jail employee said. He's a huge man. He would just sit at a table on the ground floor of the unit, with those picnic tables that are bolted to the floor. To conclude, I think it's safe to say that Martin was never all there mentally. He was said to have an IQ of only 66, which is from my understanding low enough to the point where he is considered disabled. But let's not use that as an excuse, because we need to keep in mind everyone who lost their lives and the families of the victims who suffered a devastating loss. I've also read about this theory that he couldn't have committed the crime because he was simply not intelligent enough to carry out such a plan. But it's just ridiculous, guys. He was seen on camera and literally admitted to it on tape. But I read all the comments, so leave your opinions on the case in the comment section. But nonetheless, thank you for watching this episode of Horror Vault.